Changing a country isn't easy, but change is inevitable, and the choices we make today will shape our country for generations to come. That's why the Australia Institute is publishing our first book as part of our 30th anniversary celebrations. What's the Big Idea offers 32 ideas for a better Australia from leading thinkers such as Yanis Varoufakis, Auntie Pat Anderson, and Professor Peter Doherty. The essays are a roadmap and a reminder that the solutions exist. Australia just needs the courage to implement them. Visit australiainstitute.org.au or follow the link in the show notes to pre-order your copy of What's the Big Idea today.
We are in a battle for the soul of America.
This is a fraud on the American public.
Welcome to After America. I'm Dr Emma Shortis, Director of International and Security Affairs at the Australia Institute. Donald Trump is not yet in the White House, but he's already running the show.
For the sake of unifying this country, will you concede the 2020 election and turn the page on that chapter?
No. No, why would I do that?
Economists of all stripes say that ultimately consumers pay the price of tariffs.
I don't believe
Can you guarantee American families won't pay more?
I can't guarantee anything. I can't guarantee tomorrow. But I can say that if you look at just pre-COVID, we had the greatest economy in the history of our country.
Trump is conducting foreign policy from Mar-a-Lago, threatening America's neighbours with blanket tariffs and then having their leaders call on him at the Florida enclave. He's already made his first international trip since the election, travelling at the invitation of besieged French President Emmanuel Macron. Meanwhile, in Syria, the Assad regime has collapsed.
When the end came, it came quickly. The speed of the rebel victory astonishing.
This regime brutalized and tortured and killed literally hundreds of thousands of innocent Syrians.
Seemingly bringing to an end a civil war that's lasted 13 brutal years.
External powers also at play.
For years, the main backers of Assad have been Iran, Hezbollah, and Russia. But over the last week, their support collapsed, all three of them. Because all three of them are far weaker today than they were when I took office.
In South Korea, a key US ally in East Asia, President Yoon tried and failed to impose martial law.
Dramatic scenes in Seoul.
Thousands are joining rallies. They're chanting Yoon Suk-yeol must resign. The crowd, a mix of generations, equally outraged by the attempt to upend democracy.
An impeachment vote to remove the president has failed, with members of Mr. Yoon's own governing party boycotting the proceedings.
Protesters chanted collaborators at the exiting politicians, an accusation of complicity in the president's brief declaration of martial law that for a few hours plunged the capital into chaos.
These events will have far-reaching consequences for the war on Gaza, for the Korean Peninsula, for Iran, for Russia, and for the United States, which, for better or worse, is deeply involved in the Middle East, Europe, and Asia. And how Donald Trump will respond to these challenges, and whatever new ones come his way as president, is not obvious. In this final episode of After America for the year, we wanted to reflect on the return of Trump and what that might mean for our increasingly post-American world. There's arguably no one better to do that with than Don Watson. Don's body of work on the United States includes an award-winning book, American Journeys, and 3 quarterly essays. His latest is called High Noon: Trump, Harris, and America on the Brink. Don is also a screenwriter, the author of acclaimed books like The Bush and Recollections of a Bleeding Heart, a political advisor and a speechwriter, of course, to former Prime Minister Paul Keating. Here's Don now. Don, thank you so much for coming back to join us on After America.
A pleasure.
It's lovely to see that you survived election season.
Yes, I did. I think. Although it was brutal, though, wasn't it? Really, that's the not entirely unexpected, but brutal just the same. And strangely enough, it sort of gets worse the further the election gets behind us. The more we like to say bizarre, but bizarre doesn't really do it. It's it's too real to be bizarre, and every day brings some other kind of strange, impossible sort of event with Trump's, that is, his appointments. The one thing it doesn't do to be vindicated in any of this, but I am interested in the way wrestling, which I feel like, I don't know, other people may have written about Trump and wrestling, but it struck me when I wrote that essay that wrestling was so important to Trump and to understanding Trump. And now wrestling is everything. His Secretary for Education will be the wife of a man who runs wrestling, and there are articles about these. And the man himself who runs wrestling is an absolute sadistic horror. And so he's big in the Trump camp. And I think in a way what I missed, perhaps because it was too obvious, is that if you wanted to define Trump, the word that we've tended to leave out is his sadism.
Silence of the Lambs. Has anyone ever seen a Silence of the Lambs? The late, great Hannibal Lecter is a wonderful man. He oftentimes would have a friend for dinner. Remember the last scene? Excuse me, I'm about to have a friend for dinner. Is this poor doctor?
I think he's really interested in inflicting pain. And that's in his language, of course. But the sort of fascination with Hannibal Lecter, which you think is kind of just performative nonsense, I think goes to his character, to his personality, that he's a vengeful individual, which probably has to do with the role his father played in his life. And now the way he's talking about Liz Cheney, for instance, is there's no reason to think that he's going to give up on his demands for retribution. But what form they'll take, I don't know.
I think that's always been one of my great frustrations in the way Trump is written about and understood, in that his fascination with violence is often acknowledged. The way he will kind of quite graphically describe attacks on Paul Pelosi or particular incidents of violence that are real or made up. But the connection to that and the way Trump behaves in the world is rarely, if ever, made. He's often described as somebody who is anti-war or isolationist when, I'm not sure about you, but I don't think he's anything of the sort. I think he loves violence, and that translates to how he operates as a ruler.
I think that's right. And there are two things there. I think, one was an advertisement which we didn't see here. Well, I never saw it anyway, but until recently, which ran thousands and thousands of times about the victims of, so-called, the victims of rape and murder and violence of one kind or another by illegal immigrants, so-called. They were brought there by Harris. How she dumped 13 million of these people, rather, who were rapists and murderers and butchers of one kind or another. And it went over and over again, and it listed all the sort of, in visceral terms, the crimes that they'd committed. And I think what is curious, prior to the election, when you tried to understand it, you were sort of concerned about the kind of structural flaws that delivered Trump to a point where it looked like he would, and he eventually did win the election. And those points can still be made plainly about, 50% of all wealth in the US stock market being in 1% of the population's hands, and all those sorts of things, and the failures of the Democrats to contest the ground that Trump made his own, and so on. But now it seems to me we've entered a realm which can only be understood. We're in a sort of psychological realm, which may be, if you like, a realm of fascism, if you want. And it's not simply left-wingery to talk about it that way. In fact, I think the same Liz Cheney is now talking about it the same. Well, she may now be a left-winger, I don't know. It'll be for right-wingers to decide if she is or not. She never struck me that way. But really what we need to understand now is how far this is likely to go and what sort of a country it will deliver. And how do you cope with it? At the moment, the worrying thing seems to be that the Democrats understandably are like stunned mullets. I mean, what do you do? Except lawyer up, which is a standard Democrat procedure. You have the lamest of lame duck presidents, and everyone somehow feeling that what they must do is normalise Trump at one level, while writing, in the usual journals like the New York Times, articles hostile to his ambitions. There is nothing else to do but to treat him on the terms that one would treat a popularly elected president on. But it's like you've elected a billy goat, not a person. Nevertheless, we must deal with this billy goat or this frog or whatever it is that you've put there. And then, which means you've got to deny that what you're dealing with is a frog rather than a human being. I'm not saying he's not a human being, he's a very human being, but I'm saying that you've put someone there through the electoral process who is doing things which threaten chaos, including, for instance, the FBI, the new FBI director, and you can run through them. And you begin to think, I do anyway, this will be held up in the Senate for God knows how long, in Congress. And you think, well, is that part of the tactic? That if it's held up there, Trump can't lose really, because it's always helpful to a president to say it's all Congress's fault. Look at that, it's useless over there. They can't get anything done. So in a way, it consolidates what he really is looking forward to, which is consolidating his already monarchical powers in the presidency. So he can't really lose by putting up these people who a large number of legislators are going to find difficult to condone. So then what happens? Who knows? But it's, in one sense, it's just an extreme of a pattern that's played out in the United States for a very long while. That sort of the capacity for the executive to have powers which are, in a way, we find rather extraordinary in the sorts of parliamentary democracies we have. And on top of all that, of course, Biden, by pardoning his son, I mean, it is the executive pardons are really unbelievable. I mean, they are straight out of the 18th century. They kept so much of this. And Biden, by doing that, we now know that false equivalence is just par for the course. So, pardoning Biden is nothing like the number of pardons that, not only that Trump delivered, but Obama delivered thousands of pardons. I mean, they're all big on pardoning. But, it's in human terms, it's understandable what Biden's done, but it seems to me to be, as it turns out, it's on a kind of par with his decision to seek a second term, and doesn't help at all.
Making sure that we're able to make every single solitary person eligible for what I've been able to do with the COVID. With dealing with everything we have to do with. Look,
I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either.
I'm not in this for my legacy. I'm in this to complete the job I started.
Things like immigration, LGBT rights, student loan programs, even abortion travel protections. I think those will be very unsafe. Trump can undo them. The second category of things that are in real danger are the Democrat-only programs that they passed through Congress with 50 votes without any Republican support, the Inflation Reduction Act.
Just on Joe Biden, while we're talking about him, he, at the beginning of his term, invited a bunch of historians into the Oval Office to talk about his place in history and the greatest presidents, and really made no secret about, wanting to be the most influential, impactful president since FDR. You are in the midst of writing a short history of the United States. What do you think Biden's legacy will be?
I think sadly it'll be. It won't be what it might have been had he not gone for more. Had he stuck to one term and made the most of it and got out of the way quicker. I mean, as it turns out, one doesn't want to be too wise after the event, but had he been a one-term president who removed Trump, did good things in office domestically, got unemployment down to a 50-year low, invested massively in renewables, changed the direction of American energy policy, did good things with the environment, good things with medical care, cut child poverty in half, did a lot of really terrific things and reconnected the Democratic Party with the labour movement and all those things. Had he been better at spruiking those things, and it was partly because of his physical decline that he couldn't, but also because I have a feeling that an awful lot of Democrats around him weren't so sure they were a good idea, and then got out in time to give either Harris or whatever means they chose to elect a candidate time to set themselves up, maybe everything would be different and he would be looked at as a man who gave his all and then stood aside. But now he's going to be seen as the man, I'm afraid, who did some well-meaning but ultimately feckless things in his term, or feckless politically. They'll have long-term good effects on both the economy and on society to a point, rebuilding infrastructure and all that sort of stuff. But he's going to be remembered really for hanging on too long, for an atrocious debate with a man he should have eaten. As Harris demonstrated, I mean, she completely cut him to shreds. Biden should have done it tenfold, given his experience and his political skills. So history doesn't really, doesn't make itself to suit individuals, and I'm afraid he couldn't have done worse than that. And I think the pardoning of Hunter Biden is just going to add to the sorry account that history will make of him. But he's got another 50 years of service, so he's a significant figure in American history, but not the figure I'm sure he wanted to be. And I really do feel sorry for him at the moment. I think it's rather sad to watch him. And it's not all his fault, but hubris gets them all in the end. Most of them anyway.
Well, and I mean now, he finds himself, as you said, as a lame duck. Press aren't turning up to the White House press briefings. They're going to Mar-a-Lago because Trump is effectively already in charge.
Yeah, and he turns up at the reopening of Notre Dame and these sorts of things, sitting next to Macron, speaking of people hanging on. No, there's strange times, really, with Trump sitting down there in Mar-a-Lago, in Florida of all places, really basically holding court while people come to, kneel at the kiss the ring. And Democrats, large D and small d, Democrats can only look and think, what do we do? Except, grind their teeth. And, I think the more worrying thing is, what it may show up in the Democrats is how so much of the power in the Democratic Party is with people who will be able to accommodate a Trump presidency.
Yeah.
That they will put ideology and principle aside and say, well, we can manage this. We're part of it in a way. He's not going to... He might be going to knock over all sorts of democratic norms and institutions, not to say individuals, but he's not going to knock over businesses that work in which we have large shares and interests.
In Silicon Valley, for example. Yeah.
Exactly. Lots of other places, I'm sure. So I don't know how they're going to suddenly grow a spine and say, no, what comes first is the American democracy. And that's the that's the thing. When the whole joint was founded, half, of the voices in that Constitutional Convention were saying this is too democratical, to use John Adams. I think it was John Adams called it too democratical. Hamilton was worried about it. A whole lot. Washington was saying if we don't behave well, this whole thing depends on our good behaviour. And in a way, that's what's gone now. Good behaviour is out. There's a piece by Fintan O'Toole talking about the disinhibition which is now taken over. And that's what Trump demonstrated. You can be as vile and as lurid and as outrageous and as you wish. And everybody feels a little liberated by it, even by the mendacity, even by the lies. Who cares anymore? No, I don't know how you fight back against it, but in a way it's what Trump has done. If you wanted to draw a very long historical bow, you would say, well, Trump has thumbed his nose at Washington and said, yeah, well, we're not going to behave. But, I think Washington sort of went to the grave worried sick that human beings weren't good enough to make a democracy work. And in the end, what has been defended again and again in America has been the Republic, the Union. The 750,000 people who died in the Civil War didn't die for the democracy. Though, Lincoln says it in Gettysburg. But what he defended was the Union. It was the same thing that Jackson, from the other side of politics, defended, and so on. The democracy has never been front and centre. The Union must hold together. And so they will compromise with slavery and all sorts of injustice. They'll compromise with Jim Crow, which are entirely anti-democratic. Well, they won't worry about women for 100 and how many years, even though Mrs. Adams said herself, the tyranny of men is plain for all to see. And we're not getting any notice taken of us in 1776. So there is a sort of historical logic to what's happening, even if, you've got to draw, trace very faint lines. They do connect.
I think that's what, for me, is so jarring about a lot of the coverage of Trump and what a Trump administration will look like, because so often it is framed as, he has 2 years until the midterms, at which point he will lose control of Congress because of a backlash against him, or, it's only 4 years because he can't run again because he's already served 2 terms. Because built in to all of that is the assumption that those democratic institutions continue as they are now, that they are inevitable and that the rule of law will continue, when Trump doesn't even pretend that he has any interest in those institutions. And I think part of the difference this time around is that the people alongside and underneath him are also pretty committed to dismantling those institutions. They see themselves as kind of at the culmination of a generational project to implement effectively minority rule in the United States. And it doesn't seem that a lot of the coverage is able to look that in the eye yet, if they ever will be.
No, that's right. So, I mean, you almost need to be reminded all the time of the things he has done or not done. And it's phenomenal when you write it down. So these are the things he's done, these are the things he's said, and he's president-elect. And these are the people he's appointed. And look at their biographies. And I think what he's learned, and those around him have learned, is that the sort of liberal mind can't comprehend. It can't get its head around, and its mouthpieces, its institutions can't cope with it either. So where in the modern sort of mediaverse can you cut through and get to people and say, you don't have a democracy any longer, as they might be needing to say in 12 months' time, if not now. He's just learned somehow that you can just swamp people, and you can swamp them with what it now transpires is less than 50% of the popular vote. That's the big puzzle also, I mean, for Democrats. I don't know what happened to those 7 or 8 million people who didn't vote Democrat this time who did the last time. What made them think that it'd be okay to have Trump? They couldn't possibly have thought, oh, she's going to win anyway. They made a decision to abstain, really, thinking, well, Trump won't be that bad. And that's the real, I think, historical conundrum which people will be asking about for a very long time. I mean, why did they stay home? And one answer to that, which is too glib, but I confess to thinking it, I'm sure a lot of other people do too, is have we got the wrong idea about Americans? Are there just not enough people in the United States who feel strongly enough about what's right and wrong, if you like George Washington, if you like? Are there just not enough of those people anymore? Or do they feel, a plague on both their houses? But they didn't feel that in 2020. And they didn't get a bad administration out of Biden. They got a cost of living crisis. Well, do you sort of see the equivalence between Trump and the cost of your bacon, which seemed to be the commodity that he thought was going down best with the populace? Is that enough for 7 or 8 million people to stay home and not keep him out? I think the answer is that there really are only about 50% of Americans who actually value or feel they have a sufficient interest in democracy, and the rest don't really care that much. I mean, I know an awful lot of people who voted for Trump think Trump is the ultimate Democrat, I'm sure, because he is in touch with the people and don't take much notice of what he's saying. There's one argument which is that people think, oh, well, he's a bit of a crank anyway, but, we've got to shake the place up.
Do you think it is that kind of burn it all down mentality?
I think there's a lot there. That, in its most articulate form, that's the sort of Steve Bannon position, I guess. He's the sort of the nihilistic version of Trump. But it'll always remain, well, there's that other thing that in a way we perhaps underestimate, that he's not the first, is a point that O'Toole makes too, that he's not the first strong man elected in recent years who first failed and then came back. In fact, most of them did. And that somehow they come back stronger, and it's sort of proof of their resilience, proof of their sort of ineluctable force of their personality. And then there's, that moment in Butler, Pennsylvania, when the man sort of proves his mettle in ways that an awful lot of people, presumably, thought puts him apart. that he is that sort of man cannot be denied,
Well, I mean, lots of the coverage cast him as kind of literal Jesus, that God had intervened directly.
Just the fact that he turned like that, I mean, it seems like God's hand is on his shoulder.
I believe it. I believe we all witnessed a miracle, literally. From, before it happened, the flag above got blown in the wind and it got tied into literally what looked like an angel. Did you see that video? I didn't see it. Oh my gosh, you guys have to find that.
Yeah. If I was the family of the man who was killed, I'd feel bad about that. But because God intervened to shoot him, or failed to intervene. But it's, I suppose, in a way, he's the American id. He's, and those people he's appointing are representative of the same sort of chaotic strain in American life. But you would think that a man maybe it no longer remains. That sort of notion of American hard work and attention to what is good and right, and what is just and so on, is fading. I sometimes wonder if it's not partly to do with the decline. The churches in America are so terrifically powerful and they remain powerful, but it's the evangelicals who are powerful, and the old Protestant churches have fallen away. And the Catholic Church, I don't know whether anyone counts votes on this basis, but, it's curious that J.D. Vance has sort of taken on Opus Dei Catholicism, which creates an interesting possibility. I mean, you wonder how long you can contain Vance's ego and ambition.
And Musk's and all of them.
Exactly. So what is Vance thinking when he sees Musk sitting at Trump's shoulder? And what is Donald Trump Jr. thinking when he sees Musk there? He takes Musk to Notre Dame, for God's sake. Why didn't the roof fall in again? That's another entertainment we have to look forward to, is what happens with the power plays in the Republican establishment over the next 4 years, because there's a huge amount of money, huge amount of ego involved. And it's how do you satisfy Musk's ambition and Vance's at the same time? I think Vance is really suddenly very interesting because of where he sits.
And because he's been very quiet.
He's gone very quiet, but he may be pure opportunist. He's certainly an opportunist, but he may be an opportunist. I think he's an opportunist of a different kind. And he sits in a different part of the American mind, which may be not going to work for him for very long. That sort of hard right, but conventional Catholicism may not be what Trump types really admire. He's not. Vance doesn't seem to be have that anarchic or nihilistic streak which the others have. And though he's made a huge amount of money and been backed by Peter Thiel for millions, and Peter Thiel is a self-confessed anti-democrat. He doesn't believe in democracy. He says it's worn out and useless now. That's the thing which has to be faced, is, that all of them have at one time or another, including Trump, said democracy doesn't really, get over it. So I don't know what your question was there, Emma. I've forgotten it completely.
I guess the question then becomes, if we're dealing with these mediocre intellects and enormous egos all clashing at once with very particular ideas about American power, how do you think that all gets projected out into the world? It's not a fair question, but, we can speculate.
A very unfair question.
I'm not sorry.
Look, I don't think we know any better than, we knew what was going to happen in the election, which, by the way, it was strange. In that lead-up, there was such pressure, such a desire. The people had such a desire to believe that the Democrats were going to win, and that is on this side of politics. You were sort of obliged to say, "Oh yes, they might," or "I actually don't think they will," but
it's still possible. I said that myself many times.
Yeah, well, it was unlike 2016, really. I mean, where you were just an outlier if you thought Trump was going to win, but now it's sort of, and I think that it may somehow betray a sort of denialism at work. Anyway, how will he project it? I don't know. I mean, what you have to sort of overcome, I guess, is the sense that this man, there's a sense of horror that this man's idea of how human beings relate can face a world which just seems to be in a horrible state. I mean, I have one really vivid memory of Trump. There are two, really. It's funny, and they're only to do with sort of decency and observing protocol. One was at that meeting in Europe when he physically pushed past the poor bloke from Montenegro.
I'd forgotten about that
Bumped
one.
him out of the way,
Yep.
He's probably on the phone doing a deal, and so got caught at the back of the pack. And the other was turning his back on the Queen. I thought, seeing the little Queen going, "Oh, not a very nice man," or walking ahead of her somewhere. Mind you, that's probably, anyone can do that, make that mistake. But I mean, the idea of this blundering, what word shall we use? This blunderer can somehow pick up the world and make it all work as he says he's going to do it. He'll solve, the Ukraine will be over in a week, or one phone call. It would never have happened if he'd been there, and so on. It's horrifying to think. You just know that let's put it this way. It's difficult to believe he has any kind of understanding of how these things work at all, any kind of historical understanding, much less cultural understanding, and so on. Now, the state of the world sort of suggests that those with historical and cultural understanding haven't done much good. And that's, I'm sure, what Trump followers would say. Well, he'll just do it in the way that he does business deals. Then he'll get on the phone and he'll tell you, you can have that and you can have that and I'll have this, and that's where it's going to be. I doubt it. I really do doubt it. I don't think anyone really believes it. But I don't know. Maybe there is some sort of opportunity there. I can't. But if you think of what he managed to do in his 4 years, I mean, his North Korean missions didn't exactly come off terrifically well. In fact, it's hard to think of anything that came off terrifically well in the longer run. So the idea of Trump as leader of the free world just does feel a bit oxymoronic, because you sort of know that. I mean, I suppose you can't have a kind of red line, as Obama found out, beyond which you won't go. But you need something like that, you would think. If you stand for the free world and these other people stand for the unfree world, well, then you need a kind of line. You're just not persuaded that Trump actually has a line, that it is just deal-making with whatever. That's sort of worrying. And in my kind of uneducated way, it just feels to me that it has implications for Australian foreign policy, that a Trump America would deal with Australia as Trump would deal with anybody else. That is what he sees as, part of a deal. Suggests to me, I mean, somebody said to me the other day, the one good thing that might come out of Trump is that it might wake us up to looking after our own interests and not thinking that the Americans can solve it all for us, or that, we have no choice but to be in Washington's orbit. it might take even more than Trump for us to shake us into that sort of mindset. But I don't know. I don't see anything other than that sort of implication for Australia. He's not going to say. I mean, I don't know. As far as AUKUS is concerned, I imagine when he finds out what it is, he'll just work out whether it has America's interests at heart. There's nowhere he's going to say. I mean, everything he does in the world is going to be as far as he sees America's interests lying.
Mm.
And he'll have a very limited idea of what America's interests are. They'll be very simple. You know.
Oh, and in his interests.
And in his interests. So for Australia to be seeing America's interests as our interests suddenly seems even more kind of blinkered than it has done for a long while. But too complicated for me.
I'm sure that's not true. I mean, there has, of course, inevitably been a lot of focus on AUKUS and those kind of, hard-headed alliance issues. But, Australia is also going to an election presumably early next year. And there has been some concern about how, Trump's return will affect Australian politics more broadly. I'm always a bit reluctant to kind of draw those straight lines because, we're very good at being bad by ourselves. Yeah. We don't necessarily need Trump. But do you think can you see a scenario in which Trumpian politics does start to influence ours in a more direct way?
Yeah, I think there are signs already, in a way, on both sides. That I think Peter Dutton and the Libs have been encouraged in some way by his win.
Mm.
I don't mean that they're people of Trump's calibre. Or lack of it. I think it'd be foolish to think that Peter Dutton is a kind of Australian Trump. He's just simply not. But I do, it's sort of worrying that some ex-Libs, Liberal ministers, are intimately tied up with and seem to support Trump in various ways. And I think on the other side that Trump sort of makes Labor look lead-footed and uninspired and unable to do what Labor historically needs to do, which is to look like it has an idea for where the country's going. So it seems more comfortable with a Democratic administration or an old-style Republican one. I don't know what I can't see Labor coming out of it. The sort of Trump shock pushing Labor into another position. Sadly, I think it should.
Mm.
But I do think that I don't think they want to be able. When the Libs sort of push a hard line, like they're presently pushing, for instance, on Israel, or when they push vaguely sort of Trumpian lines on anything. I think Labor is now very understandably cautious about firing back because they think that's you're on hiding to nothing. You don't want to sound like Kim Williams sounded going on about Joe Rogan the other day. It was an own goal of a massive proportions, I think.
Mm.
Sounded like a man that never really listened to Joe Rogan and didn't know the history of Joe Rogan. And so I think the only thing, well, the best defence against sort of Trumpian politics reaching Australia is an inspired Labor Party with a vision of a sort of country that can set its own cause and believes in a sort of economic democracy, a proper social democracy. There's got a bit of courage. You don't win by just standing still. There is that old not that old, saying about, the Labor Party being like a bicycle that it falls over when you stop pedalling. And just at the moment, Labor doesn't really seem to be pedalling very hard. I guess, if they wanted to learn a lesson, they would surely have to learn the lesson from the Democrats and not go down that sort of road. Mind you, the Democrats ran a very strange campaign. I think if you knew that the population were dissatisfied with the course of American history in the previous 25 years, I don't know why you would get the Clintons out, or even the Obamas for that matter. But they did, much less the Cheneys, for God's sake. But Labor just has to think anew, to sound, quote Abraham Lincoln of all people. That's the main hope, I think, whether it's about AUKUS or domestic politics or anything else, that they can't just, I think the problem with the Labor Party at the moment, and this is where it's dangerous for them, is that they look like, they're like that brief flourishing of the architectural style where you put the plumbing on the outside. And, it's the equivalent, I think Pompidou said it's horrible. Anyway, they look like they're managing politics all the time, when that's the worst look for any government. Politics needs to be managed, but you don't want to look like you're managing it. It's like the duck with its feet under the water. You want to look like you've actually got the public in mind, not your own survival. And Labor's just not been able to hide the fact, I think, that the Prime Minister came to office with his sights on the second term and not on what he did this term. And they can point to a lot of things they've done, but the public perception is, I think, of a government that's done nothing or not enough, and is, as they always say, out of touch and everything else. And you'll always be able to say when you're in politics that, the winds are against you, that we've done these good things and no one knows and so on. Well, that's just like complaining about the weather. Really, it's just truth, and inevitably when you lose office, you'll go away saying, "Well, we was robbed. It was bad luck. We had, interest rates didn't come down and all that sort of stuff." And that's true, but it's all the more reason to do things while you're there, despite the weather. And I think, to hold off even Trumpian light, which is as far as it will go here, I should think. Your only hope is to do things, to be Labor heavy, if you like, is to assert the possibilities of democracy, where it can, the extensions of democracy, where it can really go. But, I think they've sort of forgotten and I think the Democrats did too, what a kind of Labor policy looked like. Take anti-communism, McCarthyism out of it, take the Soviet Union out of it, and what a Labor Party looked like believed ought to be the case, or what Roosevelt or Johnson thought about, or Bobby Kennedy thought about where a Democratic Party could go. There are always places to go. There were economists back then who saw social investment as essential to an economy functioning and a democracy functioning. We haven't had them for a long while. There are still some, at the Australia Institute, for instance. But they've been pushed aside by both sides of politics.
Yeah, and I think there's a reason, to go back to what we were talking about earlier, that Biden looked to FDR, and it's that reason that you articulated just then. So, I guess it's never too late to get back on the bike, and that's something that we can hope for and fight for, and look to the United States for some lessons in I guess how not to do that at the moment, at least.
Yeah, and people have been running the line very quickly on one side of politics within the Democratic Party, trying to hold off the left in that party, saying, well, look at Biden, who runs a FDR domestic program and loses, or his successor loses and the Democrats lose, or look at someone like Sherrod Brownell, Ohio, who loses. But there are two arguments about that. One general is, well, what's your alternative? Go on, backing, stock buybacks at General Motors and all that sort of stuff, or go on the same way. And more specifically, you say, well, look a bit more closely and you'll see that when you're 12 points behind the top of the ticket, that is, the presidential candidates, and you still make up 10 points, then, you haven't been thrown out because you support, decent wages and conditions. You've been thrown out because there are other factors at work which go by the name of Trump and by the other name of absolute disillusionment with the way the Democrat Party operates.
I guess we'll have to wait and see and watch this space and assume, I think, probably safely, that it will continue to be dominated by Trump, even before he's been inaugurated. But for now, at least, Don, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Emma.
This episode was recorded on Monday, the 9th of December. No doubt a bunch of stuff will have happened since then. You will have heard at the start of this episode that the Australia Institute has published our first book as part of our 30th anniversary celebrations. What's the Big Idea offers 32 ideas for a better Australia from leading thinkers such as economist and author Yanis Varoufakis, human rights lawyer Jennifer Robinson, and former president of Kiribati, Anote Tong. There's also one from me on the future of Australia's relationship with the United States. You can order it now via our website, australiainstitute.org.au. You can find us on social media. We are at the Oz Institute, that's with an AUS, on Twitter and Instagram, and at australiainstitute.org.au on Blue Sky. And you can reach out to us with feedback and episode ideas via our email address, which is podcasts@australiainstitute.org.au. If you're enjoying After America, please subscribe to the show so you're notified when we come back next year. After America is supported by the Andrew Farron Foundation and produced by Angus Blackman. Our music is from Blue Dot Sessions. This is it from us for 2024. We'll be back sometime in mid-January, in time for the inauguration of the 47th President of the United States. I'm Emma Shortis. Thanks for listening.